It strikes me as amusing that I would like to speak to you today of physics. Not the kind involved when ministers are walking downstairs necessarily, but I want to talk about mass and matter and velocity and energy. But I would also speak to you of poetry and sunshine and love and justice and the power of the mind and heart to work in union to great effect. On its own, water weighs approximately 8 pounds a gallon. A gallon of water at rest in a container doesn't accomplish a whole lot. It can act as a doorstop. It can hold a lid on the container to keep the cats from getting their treats. 100 gallons of water will fill 2 large barrels and thus become difficult to move. But unless those barrels do something, the water is content to stay without bothering anyone. That which is at rest will stay at rest unless acted upon by some outside force, Newton taught us, and he, of course, was correct. Water in a living system supports life of all kinds. All species of living things on our planet rely upon water to live. Trees send roots deep into the earth to draw up the water therein, allowing wood and bark and leaves and fruit and seeds to grow, each supporting a multitude of other life forms in turn. Water formed the earth that we walk upon. Great frozen glaciers carved up continents, creating valleys and gorges. Rivers in motion wear away the earth, and over millennia created the Grand Canyon, the Mississippi River Delta. The bayous are great filters of the ocean and our rivers, drawing out silt and nutrients to support the species that thrive in that liminal habitat. For our planet to survive, water must be in motion in all of its forms, liquid, solid, and gas. Unmoving, water becomes stale, stagnant, and useless. The human heart and the human mind move us through our days, running the electrical and mechanical systems of our bodies without much in the way of direction or input from the outside. The brain is a complex electrical system that runs all the other systems in the body. It is also the place where data is stored, memories, feelings, lessons about Sir Isaac Newton and physics, random Bob Dylan lyrics, macroeconomics and art and music and creativity. The mind is where creativity lives, where rational thought happens, where ethics and desire and curiosity are. The expansive mind is what makes us something other than meat-based robots that simply respond to an array of stimuli with a similar array of behaviors, utterly predictable and identical in function. When I speak of the heart right now, I am not referring to the muscle that beats within our chest, but of the spirit that dwells within us. The collection of electrical impulses and experiences that presents itself to us as feelings of love, attraction, fear, joy, and all the others. At rest, our hearts may offer us feelings of contentment, of stillness, of peace. This heart I'm talking about is located remarkably in the 3-pound lump of electrified fat and gelatin that is our brain. We are magnificent and humble. Our hearts may also provide us with the feelings of boredom, lethargy, and loneliness. Now, both versions of the heart, the physiological one and the spiritual one, require energy and movement to keep us alive. The muscle that is our anatomical heart is run by impulses from the brain and must continue to work for the rest of the body to function. There must be force and resistance, constant motion to make the cardiovascular system work, contraction and relaxation in turn, perpetually in motion, squeeze and rest, squeeze and rest, squeeze and rest. The human body contains approximately 5 liters of water. Without the effort of the heart, the blood would remain motionless and our bodies would die. To be useful, the blood must keep moving. Now, a congregation is a relatively self-contained yet permeable system that functions a lot like a living organism. When there are good relationships among the members, the system functions pretty well. When there is stress or anxiety in the system, whether conflict or loss or some other disruption, we each respond in our own ways that cause ripples in the energy of our system, our collective system. People get tense, relationships struggle. Sometimes parts of the system break down. And that is the normal function of an organism. As a shared system, a covenanted community, we have some resources. Everybody in this room and those who are online, plus those who couldn't make it this morning, each of us has something to share with the community. Some of us have time and skills we can share. Some of us have financial resources we can offer. Some lift their voices in song each week, and some are a presence that witnesses to the power of spiritual hope and growth. Each of us gives something in our own way. So I would like to think of this pool of resources as like a pool with water. And let's imagine that our resources are represented by water. And at present, our energy is spent engaged in a lot of internal work. This congregation, like many others, is recovering from the long-term trauma of a global pandemic, from the continuing trauma of living in a country with fascism on the rise. All that stuff is tough, and we need to take care of ourselves. That's important. The mission of the congregation, as printed in our order of service and on any number of other things, is to awaken love and justice in our lives, in our communities, and in our world. Our focus must be both internal and external. We must learn and grow and develop ourselves, yes, and we must work for love and justice in the world around us. Water must come in and go out. Now, when we are in this space here and in other parts of our lives, we do the work of deepening our spiritual lives, whether that is achieved through meditation or gardening or prayer or reading and learning. All of those details are up to us as we conduct our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We bring in the water of knowledge, and with it comes oxygen and nutrients to sustain the pool that is our community. Now, the body of water that is our congregation presently has no designated focus for our efforts to improve the world. So we've become like a pond with no significant outlet for the water cycle to move through with speed enough to bring oxygen and life to its depths. I worry about what happens when the water in a pond does not move. There are a couple little rivulets that drain off some water, but nothing that seems to be significant. The largest part of our water remains relatively still, in danger of growing stagnant. Now, each of us does good stuff in our own way. We give to the Audubon Society, the Greenpeace, Oxfam, Public Radio, March of Dimes, all that stuff, right? We volunteer at food pantries and animal shelters. We help out at the library or museum. Each of these things is represented by the little rivulets of our own energy, each trickling off in its own direction. So what happens to a pond that has no outlet? It stagnates. The water loses its oxygen, algae takes over. Weeds and bushes grow into the water at the edges, eventually choking out the whole pond, becoming a spot in the forest that is a little mucky, but otherwise indistinguishable from the forest around it. Our efforts do good, but right now they're not terribly focused. Like the way the river goes over the dam just south of here. I'm learning about the Susquehanna as I live here. That dam is wide. How wide is that bridge? 3/4 of a mile? Half mile? It's far. The dam is wide and flat, and the water goes over it in a steady stream all the way across. Now, it's strong there, but the volume of water is not focused enough for folks to really take notice. It's there, it flows, that's what it does. There are no Class 5 rapids to carve deep gorges in mountains. It is wide and dispersed, and this morning it was still and calm as a sheet of glass. One of my late-night internet watching weirdly guilty pleasures is watching videos of people building shelters in the wilderness or living off the grid and finding ways to get the things they need to live comfortably. Far into the forest where there is no electricity, sometimes people still want to use electric lights or listen to the radio. So they must figure out how to make their own electricity. Universally, they choose a water wheel of some kind. These primitive engineers construct some sort of wheel, little buckets or paddles or something to catch the water and make it turn. And then there's a spindle that the wheel is mounted on, and an axle, and then a belt, and then there's a little transformer machine that I don't understand that turns the kinetic energy of the spinning into electricity that'll run a light bulb. Fabulous. Sometimes they create things that are strong enough that they can run, power tools. It's really neat. In each of these situations, the people are working with a relatively small body of water that isn't moving terribly fast. So sticking a water wheel in the middle of this thing is not going to produce a lot of electricity. So they build a structure and create a sluiceway to channel the water through a narrow space. And then they build barriers across the stream so they can force the water to come through the sluiceway, which will then turn the paddle wheel. By diverting the water into a narrow path, these engineers can increase the power of a relatively small volume of water by channeling it through a narrow gravity-fed sluice. The water emerges from that sluice opening with sufficient force to turn the wheel or turbine and thus generate electricity. Okay. So back to the pond of the UU congregation of the South, the Susquehanna Valley. We currently have a handful of small outlets that receive our energy and our resources, right? But we don't have anything focused as like the thing that this congregation does. We don't have we're known as the group that does the yard sale. Okay, but that's not a justice sort of thing that people can say, oh, I know that church, they do this justice work, right? Now, as part of a covenanted community dedicated to awakening love and justice in our lives and in the world around us, we are not focusing our combined efforts in a way that makes a significant impact anywhere. Some time ago, I talked about Buckminster Fuller and his concept of trim tabs. Trim tabs are those little steering flaps that are on giant ships, and they operate under the waterline. And by moving them just a degree, they can create enough turbulence in the wash that allows a giant ship to turn at speed. So we learned how those little bits could make it possible to turn a giant ocean liner, even though they don't look like much. Even as Tim Atkins describes, they're tiny things that can make big changes. So at that time, we put our ideas down on paper, and we affixed them. Remember, they're on triangles, and we affixed them to that big geodesic sphere that was over here for about a month. And what we did was we put in the middle of each triangle, we wrote the name of some issue that just felt too big to take on. And then at each corner of the triangle, we wrote little trim tab size things that we thought we could do to maybe help address that larger issue. What might happen if we were to focus all of the efforts of those trim tabs in one single direction? Or maybe two directions, one or two big things. What do you think might happen if we were to do that? Would channeling our collective energy into a couple of small sluiceways make a difference in the impact we want to make in the world? I think it would. After the service today, our religious educator, Sarah, and I will lead an exercise in which we saved the triangles. We saved them. We'll look at all of those paper triangles that we stuck to the geodesic thingy over here and see what they have to tell us about our priorities. It was a really good way to take the temperature of the congregation and determine its priorities. And then we will brainstorm some ideas of things that we might be able to do as a congregation, not just individual little trim tabby things, but as a congregation. What other thing might we be able to do if we could focus our energy and actually generate electricity? Right? If we could focus our energy in a way that actually made significant power. The heart must continue to pump blood if it is to be of any use. The brain must continue to take in information and learn if it is to be of any use. Water must keep moving if it is to retain its life-giving properties. My prayer for us is that we be mindful about the nourishment we receive and the nourishment we offer to others, and always grateful to the sources that support us. May we also always offer support with humility and grace.